Sorry about this, I'm just having some difficulty sharing the slides. I'll be with you all in a minute. Brilliant. Well, hello everybody. Good afternoon, and thank you so much for joining us today in today's webinar, How Can Green Jobs in the North East Work for Me? So my name's Robbie, and I'm the Schools and Youth Outreach Officer at Hope for the Future. Before we move on to anything else, I just want to give you a bit more background information into who we are as an organisation, and that'll help you understand sort of the aims and objectives of the session. So Hope for the Future is a charity that works across the UK to empower communities with the skills that they need to have effective conversations with both their local and national politicians, encouraging them to place climate action at the heart of the political agenda. Essentially, in the UK, we have a huge problem whereby politicians have often avoided talking about climate action and implementing the types of policies that we need to reach net zero and tackle climate change. Now, this is really for a number of reasons, including that politicians don't always feel that their communities believe climate change to be a top priority in terms of policy, that the conversations that often happen between politicians and normal everyday people can sometimes break down and be quite ineffective. And so Hope for the Future essentially exists to overcome these problems. Now, we have developed a unique approach to communicating climate change, specifically designed around ensuring that when we speak to politicians, the actions that we want to see and the actions that we believe benefit the people and planet go on to be implemented. And this developed approach has a proven and growing track record of really ensuring that climate action occurs both within and outside of Parliament. So in a nutshell, essentially, I suppose, Hope for the Future is a charity that works to help people create change that benefits both people and the planet. And then just to add that we are running today's webinar in collaboration with the Your Call campaign. And this is essentially to ensure and provide young people in the North East the opportunity to increase their understanding around green jobs and offer some practical advice on how to secure sustainable employment. But before we move on to the contents of today's webinar, I really want to begin by covering some housekeeping. It can be quite boring, but it's just what we need to do. So we'll get on with that straight away. Now, the webinar today will be recorded, so please be aware of that. Everything that we discuss as panelists, everything that's discussed in the chat box will be picked up and made available for people on demand. And this will all be available and accessible to people who aren't at the webinar today in a follow-up email, which we will send round at the end of today's session. And I also want to touch on how we can get involved today. Now, unfortunately, due to the situation surrounding COVID-19, today's webinar cannot take place in person. But just because we're all getting involved in different locations on our laptops, phones, tablets, whatever, it doesn't mean that we can't interact with each other. So I would really encourage you all to get involved in today's webinar. And this will make the webinar not just more interesting, it will help us get to know you better. And I suppose it will help to make the experience engaging for everybody involved, both as panelists and as viewers. And there are a number of ways that we can get involved today. So you'll see at the bottom of your screens a Q&A function, and this will basically is a space for you to ask any questions related to the content of today's webinar. And there is actually the opportunity for viewers who don't want to submit questions, or viewers who do want to submit questions can do this as well, to upvote the questions that they would most like to see the answers to. And hopefully at the end of today's session, dependent on time, we will be able to get through as many of those questions as possible. And if not, we should be able to follow them up in emails. I will also bring your attention to the chat function. And this is a space for you to introduce yourself, connect with other viewers on today's call. It can be quite a nerve-wracking thing, I suppose, to get involved in this part of the Zoom functions. But it would be great for those of you on the call now to put in the chat box your name, your age, where you're from, and if you want, why you're here today. So I'll begin. My name's Robbie. I'm 21. I'm calling in from Sheffield. And I suppose that I'm here today because I think it's really important as a young person to allow other young people the opportunity to really understand and increase their knowledge around what a green job is. And I also want to help the young people on today's call gain political support to ensure that green jobs are both accessible and widespread, both in the North East and other areas of the North of England. Now, for those of you that use social media, specifically Twitter, we would also encourage you to perhaps screenshot today's webinar, put a tweet on your timeline just to say that you're here. You can let us know that you've done that by tagging us at HopeFTFuture, or if you want to use the hashtag HFTF Green Jobs, and then we'll be able to interact with you on Twitter in live time. There is also a number of other social media platforms which we do use at Hope for the Future. You'll be able to see them above. So Twitter, as I've just mentioned, is at HopeFTFuture. Instagram is HopeForTheFuture_UK. And finally, Facebook, you can get us on Facebook just by searching the search bar, Hope for the Future, and all of that should become clear. Brilliant. So finally, at the end of today's session, you will receive a feedback form. This will appear at the top of your screen. And please, 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 it can sometimes seem like a bit of a tedious task, but I would really, really encourage you to fill that in, because by completing that, you really help us as a charity to develop and ensure that our events are the best that they can be. So now that we've covered all of the sort of boring admin stuff, let's consider then, why is this important? Why is this webinar rather important, and why does it matter? So really, for me, and I'm sure that you as viewers have lots of other ideas as well, today's webinar matters because we as young people need to understand what types of jobs are and should be available to us. More importantly, we need to know how to get these jobs, and this webinar will hopefully help us do just that. So the focus today is all about green jobs. And before we go on to today's content, I want to focus on where this webinar fits in with your journey. So you'll see the video here, which you can just watch. And that was put together by the It's Your Call campaign. I'm sure many of you will have seen that on social media. And so where this webinar fits into your personal journey then is a really important thing to consider before we move on to the content. And as you can see on the slide, there is a bit of a journey here, and that journey is by no means an overnight process. It's something that's very evolutionary and something that we need to work on. But knowing that there's young people on the call, knowing that there's probably a lot of Northerners, I have absolutely no doubt that we're all going to give it our all and put some graft in to ensure that we are able to get green jobs, and we are able to make sure that these are widespread. So you've all made a brilliant start by being at the event today in live time. You're all at the first step, and then the next steps will become clear towards the end of the webinar, and we'll be able to point you in the direction of how to get involved in those next steps. So just before we move on then, a poll will appear on your screen, which the question will be, can you explain a green job? So I would like everybody, if possible, to give that poll a go and answer. So my colleague Emma, yeah, you can see that on your screen now. Can you explain what a green job is? So I'll give you 30 seconds to answer that, and then we'll move on to that question. So the results are shared there. Brilliant. So we've got a few, yes, definitely, 29%. That's great to see. I could have a go, 64%. So hopefully by the end of it, the goal that you have should be a good one, and you should be able to explain what a green job is, or at least have an understanding. And for the 7% that said probably not, that's absolutely brilliant, and we will hopefully be able to provide you with an increased understanding of what a green job is. And it's great to see that no one has no idea, so we're all starting at some sort of similar level. So what is a good green job then, and what is a green job? So green jobs, there isn't one single universal definition. And I suppose not knowing what a green job is absolutely fine, because that's what we're here to understand today. And whilst there isn't one single universal definition as such, many different people who've worked in the sector, who work in alternative sectors, have established that green jobs should and do have some of these similar characteristics, so that they should be fair and just. So to give an example of this, green jobs should pay decent wages so that everyone is able to afford to live and enjoy life. They shouldn't have to work more than one job to survive, which some of you yourselves might already do. You might know friends and family that do that. I personally have a lot of friends and family that work multiple jobs to make ends meet. So essentially, green job is all about being fair and just, an example of which is paying decent wages. So we could say that a green job equals one job. Sustainable. Now, this is a really, really important aspect of what a green job is. Anything that you can't do forever is by definition unsustainable. So a green job being sustainable, then what that means is it is something that you can do for a prolonged period of time, perhaps even forever. It should be a career, not just a one-off sort of 2-month job that you do and then there's no work left. It should be something that you are able to do for decades to come, providing you with secure employment and guaranteed work. And then finally, the environment, I suppose this is where the link between green comes, is that green jobs should help to protect the environment, protect nature, and help to tackle climate change. And this could mean many different things. So it could be a job such as mine, for example, which is low carbon, and where I work to support young people and teachers in working with their MPs to see climate action be implemented at national and local levels of government. Or it could be something a little bit more interesting. That was a joke, by the way, if there's anyone from Hope for the Future watching. And that could look something like working in renewable energy, or working in solar and wind, and that sort of thing. So the 3 characteristics of a green job, which we all need to be aware of, is that it should be fair and just, sustainable, and protect the environment. So why then are green jobs important? Well, I'm sure that many of you will be familiar with the term climate change, global warming, or climate emergency. Now, this essentially what you need to know is that right now our world is heating up and it's happening fast. And this is causing long-term changes to our weather, and this process is known as climate change. Now, climate change is something that is happening here, and it is happening now. It can be seen across the globe in the Australian wildfires, the melting of ice caps, and the floodings in Indonesia, just to name a few examples. But just because often it seems like it's something that isn't happening in the UK, it's something that's happening in other parts of the world, doesn't mean that it is. Because living in the UK doesn't protect us from climate change and the impacts of climate change. The North East will be and already is impacted by climate change. For example, coastal erosion, rising sea levels, temperature increases. And again, this isn't just something that is isolated to the Northeast. This is something happening in communities across the country, especially in communities like mine in Sheffield, Yorkshire, where we continuously over the winter months experience flooding and the effects of that on our communities. So you might be wondering then, why and how did we get here? Well, the thing is that the Earth's temperature has changed for hundreds of years. But following the Industrial Revolution, humans have consumed more and more fossil fuels. Now, these are things like coal, oil, and gas, from the way we heat our homes, types of foods we eat, and the way that we travel from A to B all typically and generally include the use of fossil fuels. And the reason that this is a problem is that every time we use these fossil fuels, they release what's known as greenhouse gases. Now, some of you might have explored this in science or geography at school. Some of you might have watched documentaries, and that's great. But essentially, the problem is that when carbon dioxide is released into the atmosphere, the heat is trapped from the sun, which causes the Earth's temperature to increase. And issues such as deforestation, which is the process of cutting down trees, leads to even more carbon dioxide being released and led to go into the atmosphere. And essentially, more greenhouse gases means a hotter world. So while this all might seem a bit doomy and gloomy, we know that this problem of climate change is happening here and now, and we know that the effects of it are being felt by all people in all different types of places. It doesn't all have to be doom and gloom. In that, there are things being done and things that can be done to overcome this problem and help us to mitigate and adapt to it. So in 2015, you might all be aware of a little something called the Paris Agreement. Now, in Paris, countries from all across the world came together to commit to staying under 2 degrees of warming and working to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels. Now, this was a really, really significant international event whereby all the countries in the world recognized that climate change is important, we need to do something about it, and that's where the Paris Agreement came from. Now, countries following the Paris Agreement all went on to implement different types of strategies to fulfill that international commitment and that promise. The UK, for example, legislated to reach carbon neutral by 2050. So we now have a legal commitment. UK law is to be carbon neutral by 2050. So the process of tackling climate change in the UK is at least some part underway. And just to go back to that point of net zero and carbon neutrality, essentially what that refers to is balancing the amount of emissions we put out and offsetting those with different methods, or simply eliminating emissions altogether. And so because of this legal commitment, the UK will transition to a net zero economy. And knowing that this is actually happening is something that I feel and other young people definitely should feel empowered by that knowledge, by knowing that this transition is taking place, because it allows us to prepare for the different types of employment that we need to be considering, such as green jobs. And by preparing and knowing about it, it means that we can, get into the industries that won't be affected, call for these jobs to be widespread so that other people aren't affected, in ways that transitions to other economies have impacted communities, particularly northern communities, in the past. So let's move on to COVID-19. Obviously, we can't do any event these days without discussing COVID-19. Now, this is something that is very sensitive. It has impacted lots of different people. For me personally, seeing my friends and family be furloughed, seeing parents, businesses closed down permanently, losing loved ones, it is something that has been a horrendous crisis. But the thing about COVID-19, one thing about it is that all of these bad things that have happened because of it, it has allowed us sort of the political, social and economic space to imagine how things could be done differently. And that's the really important part to take away from this, is that people are now, you can see different trends, different surveys that show that people do want a different type of way of living. They want different types of jobs. They want a different type of society. And there's actually quite a common call which is being attached to the relationship between COVID-19 and the state of the economy and the state of the climate, and that is Build Back Better. So that basically encapsulates this huge opportunity that we have right now, especially to make our society and our economy and our employment prospects ones that are more sustainable, ones that are fair and just, and ones that protect the environment. So you can see there that COVID-19 almost presents an opportunity to make these green jobs widespread and accessible. And that's something that, as we go on to discuss how we can engage our MPs on this sorts of things, will be a really important line of messaging and communication to consider. So then, what has been promised to the North East? Well, the North East as a region is one that is currently seeing a lot of growth in green employment. For example, there's been the construction and operation of Dogger Bank, the world's biggest offshore wind farm. This has created hundreds of green jobs in the northeast. It's located 60 miles off the coast, and it's been able to power 4.5 million homes with turbines nearly as high as Big Ben. And I suppose that this is just one of the examples and case studies that really encapsulates what's happening in the northeast, and their call, and your call even, to ensure that you are a region that green investment occurs in. And some of you might be aware, I will draw the attention to it anyway, of the government's Green Job Task Force, which has recently been established to create 2 million green jobs by 2030. And this task force will bring together lots of different organisations, businesses, NGOs, to really ensure that the government have a coherent and realistic strategy to create green jobs in a way that brings people with them. So one of the really cool things about this task force is that one of your very own, the Managing Director of Tees Valley Local Enterprise Partnership, Sharon Lee, is a part of that task force. I just picked up a quote from an article I recently read, which really helps to encapsulate much better than I what the Northeast has been promised and the role that the Northeast has to play in the creation of green jobs. So Sharon Lane says that the Tees Valley is ideally positioned to play an integral role in the green revolution, building on our exceptional industrial heritage and our leading role in making the transition to renewable energy resources. Essentially, what this is saying is that there's lots of opportunity for the Northeast in the transition to this net zero economy. And now Sharon also adds is that the exciting developments that will come from the Tees Work project, the plans for a new waste energy plant at PD Port's facility on the Tees, the opportunities presented by hydrogen technologies, and of course, a world-recognised role in the offshore wind industry will all be essential parts of the drive for more green jobs. So in summary, what has the Northeast been promised? Well, I think the best way to explain what has been promised for the Northeast is not only the legal commitment from the government to make your lives cheaper, healthier and safer by transitioning to a climate-friendly economy, but also by helping to provide good green jobs that are sustainable, fair and just, and protect the environment. So let's look then at some examples of these green jobs. And we know, again, I'll say it again, the three times, the three things that really we need to focus on when we consider green jobs is that they are fair, just, sustainable, and protect the environment. So often, when people talk to me about green jobs especially, I automatically think of engineers, clean car engineers, solar panel workers, wind turbines, and these are all examples of the types of jobs that we need to have in a future, in an economy that in the economy that we are transitioning to. But also, we shouldn't forget that there's other types of green jobs, other types of low carbon employment, including healthcare assistants, nurses, doctors, teachers, all these types of things which are essential to the everyday workings of our society and things that we as young people really need to be looking into. So it gives me great privilege to move on to the next segment of today's webinar, where we're going to hear from a number of guest speakers, all of whom are people from the Northeast, and they'll be able to provide you with some insight into their experiences of having a green job. So we're going to hear a little bit about who they are, what their roles are, how they came into that role, and why having a green job is important to them. So without further ado, I'm going to pass over to Paul, who's the Energy Hub Manager at Tees Valley Combined Authority, and allow him the opportunity to speak and shed light on some of the things that I've just outlined. And then we'll also hear from two other brilliant speakers. So over to you, Paul.
Right. Thanks, Robbie. Is that coming through okay?
I could hear you fine, Paul, if that helps.
Great, that's brilliant.
Yeah, Paul,
Thank you ever so
you,
much.
yeah.
Smashing. There you go. I've lost 30 seconds of my 5 minutes, but thank you, everybody. Great to see you all, and thanks for attending. I'll just give you a very, very quick overview of my role in the green world and where I came from, and just sort of give you a little bit of perspective about the world in which I work, and hope that it's really useful, valuable, and interesting, most of all. So in terms of a bit of an overview of what I do and what I'm responsible for, I'm the Energy Hub Manager for the North East Yorkshire and Humber region. So I manage one of the 5 energy hubs in England, the others being Greater South East, South West, Midlands and the North West. So I'm employed and funded directly by the government's Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, and I'm based out of the Tees Valley Combined Authority up in Stockton. So I have a small team of project officers. I also manage 6 energy project managers based right across the north. So I have one in Hull, Sheffield, Leeds, York, the Tees Valley and the North East in Newcastle. So in terms of what I do, my role is quite simply to support 31 local authorities right across that big geographical area, 6 local enterprise partnerships, hundreds of housing providers, colleges, universities, small businesses, you name it. And it's all about delivering low carbon, renewable energy, innovation and energy efficiency programs and schemes right across the region. So the principal aim is all about reducing the region's demand on energy, reducing the cost of energy that we use, and significantly reduce the region's greenhouse gas emissions. So we're tasked as an energy hub by the Department for Business and Energy to do that across that huge geography. So as Robbie's introduced really well, the UK set its stall out to be a net zero emitter of carbon by 2050. But to get there, we need to massively accelerate what we call clean growth. So that means building, developing, employing, upskilling, strengthening the economy, growing it, but doing that in a way that minimises and essentially eliminates the impact on the environment and the climate. So as you can all imagine, we have got an enormous way to go. We've got to make sure that housing, transport, energy generation, manufacturing, construction, etc. is emissions free by 2050, and my role is to steer that path and ensure its delivery from the Humber to Sheffield to Leeds all the way up to Northumberland. So it's a huge job. And to give you an example, just on housing alone, here's a little fact for you. We'd have to retrofit, insulate, install zero carbon heating, etc., and dramatically improve over 8,000 properties every week for the next 30 years just to get this region alone to meet the government's targets around zero carbon, and that's just on housing. So we've got such a way to go. One of my roles is to manage the brand new £60 million that the region is getting via what's called the Green Homes Grant, and that's coming to our patch, and that's a real sign of things to come as we move to a world where we're going to need heating engineers, plumbers, plasterers, surveyors, roofers, electricians, you name it, to massively improve the housing stock so that it's effectively emissions free by 2050. So just for the next couple of minutes, I'll tell you how I came to land here, which was a very convoluted path, but I hope it'll be of interest because it's the role that I do now, which covers a huge geography, a huge investment. It's a very long way from putting holiday brochures on the shelves of a travel agents in central London. When I started doing that when I was 14, it's a very far cry from being a part-time caretaker while I was at university. And it's even further removed from my first permanent job straight out of uni, which was as a community development officer. But I studied environmental management and policy at university and moved to Middlesbrough and joined an environmental charity back in 1999 to support communities around becoming sustainable. And then I moved on to Redcar and Cleveland Borough Council back in 2004 to improve their environmental performance. And then my sort of career has grown from there. I guess perhaps my favourite 3 years was back in 2012 when I worked for Britain's biggest textile design and manufacturing firm as their sustainability manager, designing fibres, fabrics, seat coverings, even curtains from sustainable materials. So I don't know if you know this, but you can make sofa coverings, panel screens, acoustic textiles out of nettles, coffee sacks, and even hemp. And then, to let you into a secret, we can sell them to Marks and Spencers for enormous prices. But for the last 5 years, I've been leading carbon reduction, renewable energy generation, sustainability, and tackling fuel poverty for Stockton-on-Tees Borough Council. But the catalyst for all of that sort of kind of career path was volunteering. That's where I started way back when I was 14, volunteering in a community centre and understanding about the world of work. So having a passion for the environment was critical, but gaining experience in any sector was even more important. And the environment's important to me because I remember falling in love with it in 1979. I was 5 years old. I was absolutely struck by the beauty of what the natural environment could give me. Holding my little sister's hand, watching the sunset over a little place called Fishbourne Creek in Sussex. And I promised myself I wanted to do something to protect this amazing environment that we all cherish. And it might seem odd to have that passion for the natural environment, and yet I spend 10 hours a day sat behind a laptop, and I can't actually remember the last time I physically delivered a green project on the ground with my own hands, or actually got my hands dirty, because I effectively now create the process and enable everybody else to deliver those environmental projects. So I think of it like this, you know, if I don't pick up a spanner or I don't go anywhere near a high-vis jacket, that doesn't mean I can't build a bridge. I could build 20 bridges if I wanted to. But the way I do that is to get the funding, to get the investment, to do the planning and give my experience and drive to everybody else and work in partnership to get those bridges physically built. So for me, it's an exciting world. And with that in mind, I'll leave you with what I think are the key attributes for somebody working in the environmental, the energy, the climate sector, you know, the clean growth world that we now live in. And for me, the biggest attributes are, number one, it's about a willingness to learn and listen and watch and take in and understand. I still have so many people in my field that I look up to, that I admire and learn from. I might have done this for the last 25 years, but that's how I improve. That's how I understand the world in which we work and what we need to do. I listen to them, I question them. I'll never know 1% of what there is to know on energy and carbon and environment. So it's all about that willingness to open yourself up to messages. The second thing for me is try and do everything and anything you can. Any role, any job, any sector. When you are young, when you are at the very sort of inception of your career, because it's experience and time in those working environments in whatever sector is so critical. You learn so much from working with different people and organisations, how they work, processes, communication. So some say, how do you go from setting up a toy library in your first job to setting up a £6 million housing retrofit scheme? Well, it's easy. They're exactly the same. It's just about how you successfully create partnerships to deliver the outcome. Finally, and then I will be quiet and give over to everybody else. The final attribute is one of making mistakes. Don't ever be afraid to try something mad and it going wrong, it not working. I try things all the time. I try and innovate, always getting things wrong. Things fall apart, things don't work, but it's always worth taking the risk at any stage in your career to innovate and try. That's how we learn. So I'll hand over, I think there, Robbie, to our next person.
Brilliant. So next we're going to hear from Samantha Granger, who will be able to tell us a little bit more about herself and her role. So over to you, Samantha.
Thanks, Robbie. Hi, everyone. My name's Sam Granger. I'm the Head of Environmental Sustainability with a group called 13. We're a large social housing landlord in the Northeast. We have about 34,000 properties. Ranging in location from north of Tyneside to north of York. Most of those homes are actually in the Tees Valley, about 34,000, as I said. About 80% of them are in the Tees Valley, and we have about 70,000 customers, so quite a large organisation. We employ 1,500 people at the moment. Again, most of those people are located within Tees Valley, the northeast. But due to changes in the way we operate, and we do a lot of our work online now, as you can see, I'm sat here at the moment in our box bedroom. We're now employing people right across the UK. So we've got people working for us as far north as Aberdeen, down in Lincolnshire as well. So although we're a big employer in the Tees Valley, we are actually taking people from across the UK now. So just a demonstration of the fact that you don't have to be constrained by your location. So as I said, my job's Head of Environmental Sustainability. It's quite a varied role. I lead a team of specialists that look after our environmental impacts, our energy management, and the renewables within our stock. So with renewables, we are looking at how we can take our stock towards zero carbon by 2050. At the moment, we've got a target of getting them all to an EPC level C by 2030. We've mainly been doing that through increased insulation and the use of things such as photovoltaics and air source heat pumps. We also do a lot of energy management. We have a lot of multi-occupancy buildings, high-rise buildings, care homes, etc. About 900 sites that we need to manage the energy for. We're committed to trying to get all of those locations down to zero carbon by 2035. So that's a great task for us to look at in the way that we're going to retrofit those buildings and also educate our tenants and our customers on how to be more efficient in their energy use. I also lead on understanding what all of the wider environmental impacts are for the business. So we measure our carbon footprint, understanding where we are, understanding where our impacts are in relation to biodiversity, the impacts we have from our fleet vehicles, the development of homes, etc. So there's a wide range of aspects that we need to consider when it comes to protecting our impacts. My journey into this role started about 10 years ago. I moved into social housing following going back to university as a mature student to do my master's in environmental technology. Whilst there, I was given the opportunity to take on a graduate role. It meant leaving quite a secure role I'd had for a while and taking on a temporary role. But the temporary role was going to offer me the experience that I needed to move into the field I was passionate about. Up until going back to do my master's, I'd done lots of different jobs. I'd been a manager in a bingo hall, I'd sold cosmetics, all kinds of different career paths, but always wanted to get back into the environmental sector as it's something I was passionate about. So I committed to going back, getting my degree, and then I say taking on that role. I think it's important because basically, you know, it is something I'm passionate about. We've only got one planet. We've only got so many resources. And I'm happy that I've now got a role where I can actually manage the impacts within my local area, which will then obviously have the wider impact of supporting the planet. Also working in social housing, it's that social impact that we have. The provision of social housing is really important within Teesside. We get to support a number of people from different backgrounds and provide amazing services to support them in their living. And it's something I'm really passionate about. Anyway, that's enough from me. I'll now hand over to the next speaker.
Brilliant. So next we're going to hear from Andy Elliott. So Andy, over to you next.
Perfect. Cheers, Robbie. Hi, everyone. I'm Andy. I work for a national charity called Sustrans. on the t-shirt, and I manage an active travel hub in Stockton. So a brief overview of Sustrans really. So naturally, they are a charity that promote walking and cycling just as part of your everyday journeys. So it's not about like Tour de France, dressing up like a Power Ranger and cycling really far. It's about going to the shops, to school, to work sustainably. 66% of all journeys by car in the UK are under 5 miles. So a lot can be changed there that would massively help the environment. So we're an environmental charity, but sometimes we kind of don't look like one. They're quite behind the scenes. They advise government, they advise local authorities. People in Sustrans are urban designers, planners, policy writers, statisticians. It kind of goes on beneath the surface. But what I do here is we're right on the high street in Stockton Town Centre, and we run an active travel hub. So we essentially promote walking and cycling and make it easier for people to change their lives and do that by running lessons and classes, giving lots of information out. We recruit a lot of volunteers to lead walks and rides and things that people can get involved in to make walking and cycling more accessible to people. Most people can walk and they can ride a bike, but they choose not to. It's easier to sort of jump in a car, and it does have a big environmental impact, and a lot of people don't recognize that. They don't see it because it's just the done thing. You sort of grow up, you get a car, you drive to work. That's the norm in the UK, but it's not the norm in other countries, and it really doesn't need to be. How I came to be in this role, I'd say I didn't plan to have a green job at all, really. It's something that is important to me, but I left uni and just didn't know what I wanted to do. I still don't really know what I want to do when I grow up, but I was good with bikes, so I just started working in a bike shop and then a different bike shop, and I didn't quite like working for like a for-profit company. Even if me and the whole team around me did a really, really good job, it essentially meant that just more profit was passed up to whoever runs the company or owns the company or the shareholders. And at the end of the day, it felt like that was all right, and I got a wage, but it didn't feel really fulfilling. So I started looking for other things. I worked for a few charities. I worked in local like youth clubs. I worked for a national youth charity, the Prince's Trust, for a few years. And there I put more focus on sort of helping people change their behavior and change what they do, which is what led me to work for Sustrans, because that's a behavior change organization as well. So it was a bit of a roundabout path. And I would say that you don't have to always stick to sort of one certain career or one certain, like you wouldn't need to just do environmental stuff as you head towards a green job. You might find yourself in it, and I think you'll be forgiven if you take a wiggly route towards that. Why having a green job is important to me would just be that at the end of the day, I know that the work that we're doing is progressing towards like a better world, and not many people would argue against that. I don't think that if you have a world where people are a little bit healthier, they spend more time in nature, their carbon output is much lower, that feels like a much better thing. And in terms of what you would need to do, it says the question here is key attributes for someone working in your field. Mine, I think, is a little different in that I run quite a small project, and I think there's quite a few of them out there that funding is split up and put down into little chunks, and a lot of small projects exist where really a lot of my time is spent doing office health and safety. I'm the first aider and the fire marshal. I end up sort of building a website, running social media accounts, press releases. I might do some pitching for funding. I fix bikes. I teach people to ride bikes. We deliver lessons and classes. I make promotional videos or animations. I end up doing a bit of everything because there's only 3 of us in our staff team. So I think really key attributes are just having a breadth of knowledge, really, and being able to move between different subjects. That massively helps if you're working for a smaller organization. And I think that a lot of green jobs are in much sort of smaller projects and small things. It's not always big industry. So yeah, I'd say like takeaways from me would be get involved with as many local things as you can do. You wouldn't believe how a crummy job like working in a rubbish bike shop can lead to something quite good, like running the project that I run now. And although it might be bit tricky to get into, it's a really rewarding thing to know that at the end of the day, I kind of made a difference. Whereas my friends who work for, say, a big car company, they earned some money, but they earned more money for the people who work above them. I'll leave it there, really. I'd say just ask lots of questions afterwards if we've got extra time. And I know that a chap called Daryl mentioned in the comments about this being a careers event. The Sustrans Hub here is actually hiring a person. I think we put the role out today. So if you're localish to Stockton and you're after a job, it's 3 days a week, 19k pro rata, and it would be very public facing, working with people to help them change what they do, be a bit healthier, be a bit greener. Then check out the advert and apply. That's all from me. Thanks.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for that, Andy, and thank you so much to the other speakers who have been able to contribute so brilliantly to the webinar. And I hope that everybody watching both live and on demand will be able to take something away from each speaker's presentation. So I'm just going to go back to sharing my screen then. And consider, now that we know, or we're beginning to understand further what green jobs are, what's been promised for the North East. We've heard from local people with experiences in green employment and considered some of the routes and how to get there. So now we need to think about turning words into action, making insecure work secure, and what we can do as individuals and as communities to ensure that we as a country build back better from the crisis that we find ourselves in. Which brings me to politics. And I do get it, I really do. Politics isn't always sexy, and it can often seem complex, boring for some people. And I'm sure that many of you feel politics, Parliament, and other things that come with it does seem very removed from your everyday lives. But what you need to really understand is that it doesn't have to be this way. And so for the next part of the session then, I'll hopefully be able to break down some of the things that might initially make you confused about politics, or that might seem not quite clear, and offer some practical advice for what we can do going forward to secure the greener, cheaper, healthier and better future which we've discussed in this webinar today. So if we start at the beginning then, let's consider who are members of Parliament. And the next part of this session is really going to be about the Hope for the Future approach to climate lobbying, and how we can use the content which we've just learned about and heard and turn that into a message to politicians and turn that into action. So many of you probably know who members of Parliament are, some of you might not. And I think that starting at the beginning is a really good place to start. So it might seem obvious by saying, but the thing to remember when we are working with MPs and when we contact our MPs is that MPs are just people. They are someone's mum, dad, daughter, son, friend. And yes, they do have incredibly unique jobs, but it is essential, like I said, to remember from the beginning that they are just people, and that when you come to speak to them, you are speaking to a person. So more practically then, the term MP stands for, as you can see on the slide, Members of Parliament. And in the UK, we have 650 MPs, each representing their own local area, what's known as a constituency. So you'll be able to see the map of the UK. Each one of them dots on the slide represents a constituency, of which there are 650. So MPs are typically elected to the House of Commons, which is this room on the slide where you can see the green benches, every 5 years typically, and what's known as a general election. So anyone who is registered to vote and over the age of 18 or the age of 18 on election day can participate in that general election and elect their Member of Parliament. So what do MPs do then? So I just mentioned that the role of an MP, or at least MPs are elected to serve their constituents, and that I suppose really embodies what the primary role of an MP is. It's to elect the people that they represent, and they do that by lots of different methods. So attending debates, for example, you saw the picture of the House of Commons, that's often where debates happen. They form government, so right now we have a Conservative government, and a group of MPs were elected to form that government. or acting as the opposition. So, for example, the Labour Party are currently in opposition. A group of MPs were elected to form that opposition. Asking questions of ministers, so the people that run the government departments, whether it be the Business, Energy, Industrial Strategy Department, whether it be the Department for Transport, those types of things. MPs vote on new policies and they scrutinise existing policies and new laws. So what an MP can do really depends on whether they're part of the government or the opposition. And elections, like I just said, decide who ends up in government and who ends up in opposition. And after elections are completed, then essentially MPs, all the MPs that are elected, 650, will go to Parliament, and the political party, so whether it be Conservatives, Labour, Liberal Democrats, Green, whatever, will, with the largest number of MPs, will then go on to form the government. And the second largest party forms what is known as the opposition. So just as I mentioned, right now we have a Conservative government because the Conservative Party has the most members of Parliament elected, and second to them is the opposition. So the Labour Party have the second highest number of members of Parliament elected. And so, yeah, what you ask your MP does largely depend on whether they are a government or opposition member of Parliament. So let's look at some of the things that you can ask your MP. And I suppose that, you know, it's incredibly important for us to understand what our MPs can actually do for us, because that's the whole point of us knowing why it's important to work with them when it comes to green jobs, and how they can help us guarantee these well-paid green jobs. So quite practically then, there's a list there, some of the things that you can ask your MP to do. And if you have any further ideas and stuff on these asks, then you can definitely get in touch with the Hope for the Future team, who will be able to help you develop these ideas and develop what you want to ask your MP. So these are some of the things: written questions. You can ask your MP to submit a written question related to green jobs. It could be about the number of green jobs that the government expects to be available to people in your constituency by the end of the year. You could ask your MP to engage with the local media. So asking your MP to write an article in the local newspaper about why green jobs are important is a really good thing to ask your MP. You could ask your MP to work with the local authority. So, you know, you could ask your MP, perhaps again related to green jobs, to work with the local council to write a local green jobs generation strategy, which might include retrofitting homes or creating a community energy project. So these are some of the types of things that we can ask our MPs. And some of you might be thinking, why would I ask them that? What is the importance of that? What will it actually do? So let's consider some of the benefits of these things then. Well, for example, you know, asking your MP to submit a question to the government, if, for example, it was about the number of green jobs that they expect to be created in your constituency, that can really help to gain information about the government's expectations, really feed into any ideas that you have about the level of green jobs that should be in your constituency and that are needed. It also help if you're a part of a campaign to use them facts and figures as a part of that. Writing in the local media, for example, can really help build support. We know that local newspapers are trusted much more by local communities than national press. So having your MP speak and write in the local media is a really good way to let local people know about the challenges that we are facing and the opportunities, of course. Writing to ministers can, you know, it really lets the government know what MPs feel are the concerns of their constituents. I discussed earlier that often the inadequate level of climate action that we see in the UK and the fact that the government isn't meeting many of its own targets is largely down to the fact that MPs often feel that climate action and the topic of climate change isn't a priority from their constituents. So you can see how then contacting your MP to let them know that climate change and green jobs is something that matters to you, and asking them to pass that on to the government, you can see how the government can then hear through your MP the concerns of the people's constituency regions. And then also, if, for example, you ask your MP to work with the local authority, I suppose the big benefit of that is really combining local and national climate action, something that is really important for the types of changes that we need. So local authorities, for example, are really grounded in their communities. They know the communities very well. They know the types of changes that need to happen, and they are often on the front lines of the climate emergency. So whether it be flooding, heat waves, that sort of thing, and they are, I suppose, best placed to implement many of these policies. So having your MP work with the local authority to provide bigger budgets, provide more powers to do these things is a really, really important way to ensure that green jobs are accessible and widespread, both across the country and in the community that you live in. So deciding what you should ask your MP then is determined by a couple of factors, including what challenges you want to, what changes rather you want to see, and it also depends on who your MPs are. This event was initially targeted at young people in the constituencies of Redcar, Darlington and Bishop Auckland. Here are the MPs for them constituencies. My colleague Emma is going to put a link into the chat which will allow you to find out who your MP is, and it would be great if you could feed that into the chat just so we know who your MP is, where you're from again, and then we might be able to or will be able to help you engage with that MP. So I'll leave about 30 seconds for you to use that link and find out who your MP is. It should only take a minute if you've got a phone or another digital device nearby. Brilliant. So you will have had that link now and had the opportunity to see who your MP is. And if not, that's something that you can do after the webinar. But what we're going to do now is move on to the relationship-based approach. And I will just add that it's been flagged. We are running very short of time, so there's 3 minutes until we're meant to end the webinar. We will continue, so for anybody that wants to stay on, feel free to do so. But like I said earlier, the on-demand version will be sent to you anyway. So the relationship-based approach then. So now that we know who your MP is, the next step is really about creating an ask. And at Hope for the Future, we believe that the best way to do this is through what we've developed as the relationship-based approach. Now, this is a 3-step plan that has been fostered and used by individuals, campaign groups and communities to ensure that climate action is prioritised at local and national levels of government. And broken down into steps, it looks like this. So research, finding common ground, defining the SMART agenda, and offering rewards and preparing for a conversation. So let's come to the research then. So at Hope for the Future, we use this brilliant quote by Ken Hamer, which is designing a presentation without your audience in mind is like writing a love letter and addressing it to whom it may concern. And what this means is that, you know, it's incredibly important to know who you're writing to, because otherwise the content of that message will not be taken to heart. And to really change hearts and minds, to really ensure that action happens, you want that message to be felt by the heart. And so to ensure that our presentation is then taken to the heart, it's essential we understand where our MPs lie on climate change. You can do this by checking out their social media. You can do this by looking at websites such as Hansard, They Work For You, which hopefully Emma will be able to put them in the chart. And, you know, by doing that, by doing the research on who your MP is, looking at their voting record, looking at issues that they've spoken about, you'll be able to gain a real good insight into what they've been talking about and what they care about, and this will then be able to be used to guide your message. So once you have all of this information in hand, you'll be able to identify where your MP might sit on climate change. You know, there might be someone who is in total agreement of lots of different types of climate action. There might be someone who promotes climate action but doesn't always talk about it, or there might be someone who often avoids discussing climate change and doesn't have the best voting record on climate policy. But that's where finding common ground comes in. And this is a really, really important part of the Hope for the Future relationship-based approach. So finding common ground is really important, and it can help you to influence your audience, your MP. And we've created the Venn diagram, which you'll be able to see on the screen, to help you identify where common ground lies with you and your MP. And you'll be able to do this because you will have done all of the research into who your MP is, what their agenda, so to speak, is, and the issues that they have at heart. So, you know, you can make, on one side, your MP's agenda. So in this instance, for this example, your MP might be someone who's avoided action on climate change. He might be visibly acting on local issues concerning locals and high local energy, high local levels of air pollution in nearby community energy projects. Might be something that's happening in your community. And then your agenda as somebody who wants to see green jobs as a young person is tackling climate change, challenging government policy, raising awareness of climate change, and empowering your MP to take action. So what we would recommend the common ground there is doing something that looks at, you know, combating the problem of air pollution in your local constituency and keeping that message very local. So the common ground there might be is you as the campaigner asking your MP to submit, to write a local article concerning air pollution, and helping to bring more attention to that issue and building that support. So that's a really, really good way to consider how your agenda and your MP's agenda might not always initially seem aligned, but how actually by analysing two, you can usually find, or always I would say, find common ground and work on something together. So the next part of this agenda then, this relationship-based approach rather, is creating an ask. And the really important thing about creating an ask is that it needs to be smart. So specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and timely. And in the follow-up sessions, all of this training will be done in much, much more detail. But to give an overview for now, when you're asking your MP something, you need to make sure that it is very specific. It can't be something really general because that's not very useful to MPs who are often serving thousands and thousands of people. It has to be something that, you know, you can measure. You can say that because of the conversation that I had with my MP, this has happened. It has to be something achievable. So this is where considering whether your MP is opposition member of parliament or on the government bench is really important. Realistic again, and something timely. So you want that action to be something that can be done relatively soon, not something too long term. And them short term asks will lead to long term action. And something that I will just add about the relationship-based approach is that it's really, really important to ensure that when you talk about climate action to your MP, you do sell it as something that benefits everybody. So it is a core benefit to act on climate change, whether it's, again, making lives cheaper, healthier, better. And that's for the people of the constituency, but also for you and your MP. And there does come benefits to your MP. And if you're able to sell these in the communications that you have, then your MP is much, much more willing to want to see them actions take place. So these are things like improving knowledge and understanding. You know, your MP might be somebody, because they have so many issues to consider on a day-to-day basis, that doesn't know as much as you about green jobs or climate change. So by engaging with them and letting them know about the issue and providing them with knowledge, will really provide a learning opportunity for them, which could be one of the things that has been missing for their reason for inaction on climate. Providing a constituency mandate, back to the reason and back to the role of an MP, is to really represent the people that they elect. So by allowing your MP to do something that benefits the local constituency will mean that, you know, they're fulfilling their primary role as a member of parliament. Local media, different events can offer good publicity for the MP, shows that they're engaging with their community and that sort of thing. And then depending on who your MP is, you know, they might be somebody who's served in Parliament for 30 years. The idea of leaving a legacy of public service is something that can often be a good selling point. So the fact that, you know, once your MP leaves Parliament, they can say, when I was in Parliament, we passed this law, we made this change, we created this many green jobs, we improved the lives of this many people, is a really, really, really good tactic to use. And so, in summary, that is the Hope for the Future approach to lobbying. And again, the slides will be sent round with the on-demand version of this call, and the drop-in sessions, which is the next step in your journey to securing widespread support for green jobs. We'll be able to go into this lobbying technique much more detailed. And the next step then is the drop-in session, which for the constituents of Redcar, Bishop Auckland and Darlington will be on the 18th of November, and further instructions will be sent around to those people. So that brings me to the end of today's webinar. So my last thing would just be to stay in touch, continue the good work in calling for green jobs, and I will just end by reading this, which is that it's people, lots of people coming together, which makes change happen. We need as many people as possible contacting and meeting with their MPs, expressing their support for climate action. And you might think that other people are on it, but believe me, they're not. So do tell a family member, do tell a friend that you came today, share this webinar with them and encourage them to come along to meet your MP with you to ensure that green jobs are accessible and widespread in the North East. So thank you so much to everybody that came, and that's the end. So goodbye.